What if I told you that you didn't outgrow video games? You're simply just stuck playing the same ones over and over again. AAA multiplayer games are awesome until suddenly they aren't. If games feel, boring, repetitive, or like a chore, you might be stuck in the same loop that I was. Now, I'm just going to start by saying that this is kind of like a less scripted, more chill, talking kind of video. And I just kind of want to talk about my experience with playing AAA games, the big games. I grew up playing a lot of the most popular games, basically. I'm sure a lot of people have in this same way. Call of Duty, I pretty much played every release until the newest one. All the sports games, mainly 2K and Madden. I've played every 2K probably from like 2K12 or 2K11 all the way up to 2K26. So, and similar with Madden, even FIFA I've played a lot of, NHL I've played a lot of. The main reason I even played all these games every year, I bought the same rendition every year for so long, is because all of my friends also played the same kind of games. And in high school and college, which for me wasn't that long ago, but everyone got on every night, on party chat, rec lobbies, mud squads. Those were all fun. Back when Fortnite was way bigger and kind of new, that game was a lot of fun to play in a squad. And I wouldn't trade any of these memories for anything. I'm not saying that it's bad to play any of the big popular games. I would say it's less about the games themselves, really, and it's kind of more of just like a space for hanging out with your friends. Kind of like, I don't even want to say a third place, but, almost something like that. And, these games that release every year, like 2K, for example, they're just familiar games. They're super easy to grind, super easy to get into playing. Like, 2K, we knew what we had to do, just grind the My Career, get all the badges, etc. And then you can get into Park or Rec or whatever and play with your friends as much as possible. And a lot of these games, like, earlier on when I started playing them, the yearly releases were, like, super hype. All of my friends were buying it day one or getting, 2K typically had this, like, very... now looking back at it, 2K had this like very sketch way, and they still do it now, where they release these games like super early, for like a week early, for people who pay an extra $10 or whatever, or pre-order the game. And it's kind of crazy that nowadays they still ask for pre-orders, even though like they won't show the trailer until like 3 days out, and you're supposed to pre-order this game for a trailer of gameplay that you haven't even seen yet. It's kind of an insane ask now that I think about it, but, I digress. I'm not going to ramble on about that. Now, lots of these games were probably a big grind, but it was genuinely fun to play, at least when your friends were on. And what I really want to talk about here is kind of what happens as, I think of this kind of dramatically like a little graph that goes down, and now we're kind of at the beginning of the end, And, eventually, when less friends have time to play these games as often as we used to play, people have lives, people start doing things, getting in relationships, working a lot more, whatever it might be. And when that starts to happen, the yearly releases kind of started to feel like more of the same thing with just like a different skin. And I mean, a lot of these games, like 2K, like Madden, are generally just basically a reskin of the previous game now. It's just like a roster change with like some very minor additions. 2K likes to shake up kind of the, general meta of the game every year, but they kind of patch it back to some similar previous state anyways. I definitely started playing more out of habit and less out of excitement, especially when, not all friends can be on at the same time, and the grind doesn't feel as good anymore. Another big thing that, some people might also experience as they get a little older is a lot of us were worse at these games because, of course, we weren't playing as much. And the skill gap really started to show. Like in 2K, like in COD, I'm not going to say that I was like some great first-person shooter player, but I feel like in Black Ops 2, I can consistently get on good score streaks and whatever. But, when Cold War or Black Ops 6 showed up, now I can't even do much. And it could be a main part being skill-based matchmaking. You can't kind of shit on noobs anymore, as one would say, but some of these games started feeling a lot more boring, and game sessions would end probably earlier because you're bored of the game. And it was at this point where I started thinking, like, have I outgrown gaming? Is there nothing to play? Do I even like video games anymore? Am I just too old for this kind of thing? But when you get down to the real issue, which is these big popular multiplayer games, they're kind of designed around the same gameplay loop every year, where eventually, especially if you don't have as many friends to play with, it starts to feel way less rewarding. The monetization, which is crazy in a lot of these games, and it keeps getting worse, it encourages like this endless grind where you cannot carry anything over to the next year even, which is like, I mean, if you think about it, how insane is that? You can spend $100 on VC in 2K, and the next year you can't carry any of that over to the next 2K? I mean, what is that? Now, there's nothing wrong with liking this kind of gameplay loop. I just don't think it's for everyone, and I think like a good amount of people really can't sustain this kind of thing long term, or just get tired of it long term. Like winning and grinding are basically are rewarded more than having fun with your friends, or even alone, especially alone. So if you only stick to playing these games, your brain probably thinks gaming is only about tryharding, it's only about grinding, it's only about sweating your ass off. And again, there's nothing wrong with being good at one of these big online multiplayer games, but there's also nothing wrong with not wanting to be amazing at every game you play. In fact, I would say like my best recent memory, gaming moments with friends is games that had a lot lower stakes. You could think something like Gang Beasts, even early Fortnite, when everybody was kind of still figuring out the game and it wasn't very good. Most recently, we played some Human Fall Flat, and it's another game where, there's just low stakes. There's not really much to stress about in the game, per se. Now, after I had these thoughts about, was I done with gaming? Was I just really tired of everything? Is everything just boring now? I decided to try new games. Like some people might, I switched on to single-player games, and I really enjoyed playing some good story games, or games with like some unique fun mechanics. And let me preface this by saying, not every masterpiece game has to be your favorite game, or you don't even have to like it. Like for starters, I personally, the first thing I played was the Tomb Raider trilogy. I loved every game in that series. It was great. Witcher 3, I played the whole thing through, not the DLC, but just a normal game. And again, if somebody doesn't like this game, I totally understand. It's not for everybody. Titanfall 2, I played through that story. That was quite a bit of fun. I wish I was there when, that game was probably peaking online. And, I also mainly, which is what I'm trying to say here, is realize that not every big, solo or whatever type game is for me. For example, something that I really wanted to play and get into because of the hype was Elden Ring, and I couldn't really finish that game. It was my first Souls-like game, whatever you want to call it, but I couldn't get into it too much. It just kind of felt overwhelming, felt like a lot. Maybe I'll go back to it one day. And if you ever feel that way about a different game, if you ever want to try something, that's totally okay. I think it's important to play games with no real pressure to win, no real pressure to grind. It's probably like in human nature, try to grind out certain games, or, get frustrated when even single player games, you can't defeat a boss or whatever. But I think it's great to play at your own pace and not really worry about some of these things, And I think that's much easier to do with these smaller, less low stakes games that are not these AAA same thing every year type games. But playing these games really made me realize that, I like gaming. I still like to play games, and I just need to change the scenery to find what different games I like to play. Now, for people who were like me and maybe want to try to go away from playing 2K, from playing Call of Duty, from playing whatever, you might think like, where do I go next from here? And like I said earlier, I'd recommend, trying something out like the Tomb Raider remastered games. I don't know if I'd recommend Elden Ring as strongly, but it certainly might be an interesting challenge if that's kind of what you want to go for. Right now I'm playing Borderlands 2, the story, and I'm having quite a bit of fun with that. I think it's great to go back to some of these like quote-unquote highly rated masterpiece, whatever you want to call it, older games, but definitely don't go in with like insane expectations. It's totally okay to not like a game. And that being said, it's also totally okay if you still like all these AAA games and you still want to play into that, yearly grind or whatever you want to call it. Nothing wrong with that. But I'd also say it's worth a shot to give some other game that looks interesting a chance because, who knows what kind of rabbit hole you might get yourself into in the best way, of course. And I think all of this is to say that if you ever think video games, playing video games is not for you, I think that's like kind of your mind, I think that's you telling yourself, hey, it's time to give some new games a chance. You might just be burnt out on like one type of game, I think it's important to know that gaming doesn't always have to be competitive to be fun. Like I said, there's certainly nothing wrong with being competitive, but, it's also cool to play some low stakes games sometimes. And it's totally okay for your taste in games to change. I know mine definitely has. I'm not sure if I ever will touch another, AAA multiplayer type game again, but I'm totally open to it if I see some improvements in that space. So in the end, it turns out that I didn't really fall out of love with gaming. I just kind of outgrew the games that I kind of kept forcing myself to play out of habit. I'm interested to see what you guys think about, is there anybody with a similar experience to mine? What kind of, games have you tried out that you liked or that you hated? I'd love to hear more in the comments. Thanks for watching.